Hello, friends. My name is Christina Grozik, and I am with a documentary called Going which is an exploration into the world of sound, vibration, frequency, and even silence. If you're interested in finding out more about the film, you can always go to the website goingumfilm.com. And because those topics are so important, decided to carry on the discussions around them. And today I am really excited. I can't wait to dive into this topic. This next guest, Jeff Edwards, is not only a retired sonar technician, but he is a best-selling and award-winning author. Some of his works include Sea of Shadows, The Seventh Angel, Sword of Shiva, and he is a consultant to the military. So Jeff, thank you so much for being here today and for taking the time out of your super busy schedule. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. I know we connected actually through a mutual friend. So Paco Chiarici, I had met years ago. He was part of a documentary, and I will say it's one of my favorite documentaries still to this day, called Speed and Angels. What a fascinating journey. I guess he is also an author too, which
He
is
is indeed.
exciting. Yeah, so I'm really excited that he's connected us. And I know when we spoke on the phone, you were probably like, oh, who is this? Right away I'm like, oh, and how's this work and how's that work? So I can't wait. I know I like our time, we had to finally cut it off, but I can't wait to talk to you about this today because I learned so much. I was writing, I told you I had a receipt in my car and I'm writing
Hmm.
down all these notes on the front and back. So this exploration and this journey today, I think I'm so excited to be here with you. So thank you for that.
Oh,
So
my
the
pleasure.
world of sonar, right? We're talking about sonar. So the world of sonar, I understand that, bats and dolphin use sonar to see the world. So they send out this signal, the sound waves, and it detects an object in front of them, and then it will reflect back what that object is. Well, maybe not necessarily what it is, but the size of it, where it's located, something called echolocation. So
Yeah.
is this how it works with military sonar? And I understand there's different kinds of sonar too.
Well, as we discussed on the phone, there are really two modes of sonar: passive sonar and active sonar. Echolocation, which is what many marine mammals use, and bats, and well, so kind of a variety of animals use, is an example of active sonar, which is to say that there's a transmission of sound into the medium, whether that's the air or the water or what have you, and then that sound reflects off something, whether it's an object, a feature of the terrain, animals, other bats, predators, fish, whatever it happens to be, and then brings back information to the animal who's using it. That's an example of active sonar, and that's how sonar kind of started in the for navies, it was entirely about active. We'll talk about passive in a minute. But echolocation is an example of active sonar, transmitting into the medium and then evaluating the return echoes. And I would just like to say this: the one thing that we know about one of the primary things that I know about sonar in the natural world is that animals are infinitely better at it than we are. Um, our our methods of transmission and reception are getting our sensors are getting more acute over time and more refined over time and more advanced over time. Our ability to process that information is getting more advanced over time, but we don't have a patch on how animals do it. Dolphins are 1,000 times better at it than we are.
Wow. Yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, not to take away anything that we're doing, right? Or I should say that you're doing, but, I'm a big believer of following and learning from nature and animals. So I am always the person, if I see an animal acting very erratically all of a sudden, you can bet that I am probably going to follow whatever they're doing. I mean, even in times of tsunamis and natural
Oh
disasters,
yeah.
you hear these stories about them like getting out of the way long before the disaster hits,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yes,
fascinating. It's
it is.
fascinating
It is indeed.
work. Yeah, so when we're talking about active, I understand that the different frequencies can also impact the way you're seeing things, correct?
Oh no, it's absolutely correct. Uh, the range that when you hear me use the word range, I'm talking about distance. And in the military world, in the tactical world, we tend to, at least for purposes of sonar, we tend to talk of distance in terms of yards. So 10,000 yards, 15,000 yards, 500 yards, things of that nature. So uh, the range at which you can detect a target is very dependent upon the frequency of acoustic energy you're using, the frequency of the sound you're using, and also the degree of refinement in the image. So, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but the lower the frequency is, the farther you can see. But the lower the frequency is, the lower the resolution is. So you can see that there's something over there, but it's just a blip. You can't see very much about it. If you crank the frequency up, if you go into higher acoustic frequencies, the resolution of the images that you get are much better, which is why a side scan sonar, say being towed through a lake sometimes, looking down 300 feet or 400 feet or something or other, may actually be able to see not just that there's an object on the bottom of the lake. They may actually be able to say, okay, that's an airplane, that's definitely a Cessna, we can see the outline, we can see the windows on the side, we can, so you can get this ultra high resolution, but you can't see very far. So if you want that kind of resolution, you can only see a few hundred yards, maybe maybe in the low thousands in some cases. But if you want to see a long way away, if you want to see 10,000 yards, 15,000 yards, 30,000 yards, 60,000 yards away, you're going to have to move into lower frequency ranges, and then you don't see as well. So it's an interesting, that's an interesting just nature about how sound works.
I mean, it's like mind blowing that that even exists and that you can send these waves out to even detect those. So the higher the frequency, the shorter, I guess, the range of what you can see is, but with more clarity. The lower the frequency, you can see for a longer distance, but a lower resolution.
That's exactly right.
Okay, and then I think we hear, when you're watching these military shows and they're, in this dark corridor and they got all these really cool screens with all these bright electronics on it and they have these very intense faces, and you hear the sound, the ping.
Yeah.
Does that actually exist or is that a movie effect?
Well, it actually does exist. It doesn't necessarily sound like what it sounds like in the movies. The movies tend to fall back on, and by the way, we do call it pinging, even though it doesn't sound like a ping most of the time. The very early sonars, Aztec, and the very early sonars had the sound was definitely onomatopoetically. You would use the word ping automatically. There are some modes that don't sound anything like a ping at all in real life. In fact, the earliest sonar that I worked on, and this is back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, it was an old tube sonar, brute force electronics. It had a mode in it, and I don't remember what the mode was, but it didn't sound like a ping at all. If you can imagine dropping a cinder block on a piece of concrete and then dragging it with a rope, that's what it sounded like. It was this big kind of hard thump, like two things crashing together, and then the return would sound like dragging this thing across a cement floor. So while the pings that you hear in the sun and as to represent sonar are kind of in movies, are kind of cultural shorthand that sounds like what we expect from old World War II movies. The intense faces and the dark spaces and the glowing lights on the screens and everything, and the pinging sound going out of the water, that's all real.
Wow. And we talked, and when we were on the phone, what? So we had talked about there's a motto and it is comprised of three components. So search,
Yep,
classify, and destroy.
that's
Right?
right.
So in some of these things you're not, when you do see them in the movies, right? You're not seeing all of it. And what a stressful situation this sounds like to me. I mean, personally, I know myself and my composition. I don't think I'm cut from that cloth that I could withstand the stress of that moment, right? So when you're searching, you're looking for the object. You're
Right.
looking to see where the object is, what the object is, the classification. And with your job, there is zero room for error.
That's right.
Right. It's a life
It's
and death situation. So how does all of this work? Can you take us through that journey a little bit?
sure, I can discuss it. And like you said, the submarine hunter's motto, or the sonar technician's motto, is in Latin is "Seguire classis destructum," search, classify, destroy. So as you said, the first thing you do is start out searching. You're looking around you. By the way, I've served on mostly cruisers and destroyers, almost entirely destroyers, but cruisers in the early part of my career. So a surface ship searching for a submarine, and you've heard me say this before, is like a dog chasing a car. You're probably not going to catch it, and if you do, you're in big trouble. So it's that there's a lot of interesting things about the nature of that dynamic. But uh, um, first of all, sometimes you don't find anything, and then it's a running joke in our community that sometimes, some days, it's seguire, 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 search, 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 and you don't ever find anything. That can happen. But if you do find something, then you move into the second phase, which is classify. And that's trying to figure out what it is. It's not enough in the movies. They go, Captain, target it, we've got a target at bearing 205 at 35,000 yards, or whatever it happens to be. And they instantly know that it's the bad guy. And then it's all about putting ordnance on target. It's all about, how do we hit this guy with a torpedo, or whatever weapon it is that we're going to use. In real life, it's not that simple. They cut out the entire middle part, which is classification. And the classification part this is where you have to figure out what it is. You have to start going, okay, first of all, is it possible submarine target or a non-submarine target? Because there's a lot of things in the water that make noise. There's a lot of things in the water that can return an echo. You could be bouncing your sound wave off of a sailboat, or an oil tanker, or an oil platform, or a fishing boat, or an underwater mountain, what we call a pinnacle. Or a wreck on the bottom of the ocean can sometimes, a shipwreck on the bottom of the ocean can sometimes give you returns back. So it's like, first you have to figure out kind of, is it a submarine or is it a non-submarine? You want to try to do this initial kind of, is it a submarine or a non-submarine? Is it a possible submarine or a non-submarine? If you can go, okay, I've got frequencies that are absolutely consistent with an aircraft carrier, and oh, by the way, look, there's an aircraft carrier on our radar repeater. Okay, now we've pretty much eliminated the possibility that it's a submarine. But once you've looked out there, and what we call the bearing is clear or foul, that's where if your bearing is clear, that means for as far as your sensors can go in the direction that you're looking, your radar is saying, we don't see anything on the surface. You're picking up an echo at 0.075 degrees. We don't see anything at 0.75 degrees for as far as we could see, or nearest target on that bearing is 70,000 yards. And you're like, okay, yeah, we're definitely not tracking this guy at 70,000 yards. So, but so that's bearing clear or foul. Bearing clear is your bearing there's nothing on that bearing. You might have a submarine. Bearing foul is there's something at that bearing that might actually represent the target that you're seeing. So then but you're constantly going through this winnowing process. You're constantly trying to figure out submarine, possible submarine, or non-submarine, possible submarine. As soon as you go non-sub, you just mark it, keep track of it, move on and look for the next thing. You go back into search mode. If you determine that it's a possible sub, then you're going through winnowing down all of the things that could make it potentially not be a submarine. And then when you get through all those things, you go, okay, I have a relatively high degree of, and I'm not going to go into what we call the classifications and things like that, because that could potentially get into sensitive areas. Let's just say that non-sub is one of them and pos-sub is one of them, and I'm not going any farther than that. But let's say you've got a pos-sub contact, which means possible submarine. Then there are various things you have to do to kind of confirm that it's a submarine. But once you know it's a submarine, then you have to figure out what kind of submarine it is. Because just because it's a submarine doesn't mean you can shoot at it. Because if we happen to be in an imaginary conflict, we're in a conflict with China, and there's a French submarine out there, you can't go, well, there are no U.S. submarines in the area, I can shoot that guy. No, it might be a French submarine, it might be a Danish submarine, it might be a German submarine, it might be a Japanese submarine, it might be. So it's like there are all these things you have to go through. You can't just pull the trigger, and while you're going through this, you're building up to this point, and we're assuming that you're in a combat scenario where it's going to be necessary to shoot at this guy, to shoot at the sub. You can't just pull the trigger on it, because you can't shoot a sailboat. You can't do that. You can't shoot an oil platform. You can't shoot, you can't just pull the trigger on anything. You can't be trigger happy. So it's not enough to know that there's something out there and that it's a possible submarine. You have to go through this entire winnowing process because, as you said, it's a life or death thing. If you get it wrong, you can kill people. You can kill people who are not your enemies, not your adversaries. You can kill innocent bystanders, and that's not acceptable. So obviously.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting. And when we were talking on the phone, one of the things that came into my head right away was, well, I think I asked you, well, do you know if they are aware of your presence? Like, is there something that, hey, they know we're here, but it sounds like there's not. So if you're on their radar too, so they are trying to figure out what you are. So then it becomes this race, and it sounds like math really comes into this. So not only are you trying to determine, what that object is, but how fast it's moving, where it's moving, the direction, all of it. Because if you do decide to move forward, and if you consider it's a threat of some sort, and that torpedo is going to be launched, then in order for that torpedo to hit, you need to calculate the movement of it, right? But you're doing this all in the mindset, thinking that maybe they know we're here too and they're tracking us. So then it's who's going to launch first, right?
That's exactly right. Well, first of all, if it's a surface ship tracking a submarine, now what I'm saying doesn't apply to a submarine tracking a submarine because they're in the same part of the environment. And what I'm going to say doesn't apply to an aircraft tracking a submarine because the aircraft, unless they're flying really low, is very difficult for the submarine to detect. So if the aircraft is using sonobuoys or something like that, sometimes the aircraft can have sensors in the water and the submarine doesn't hear them. So that's more of an even engagement. But and we didn't actually get into this on the call because we didn't have time. Submarines have an inherent advantage in this situation. There's a thing called Snell's law. Snell's law means that acoustic energy gravitates towards the point of minimum velocity, which basically means that if a sound wave can refract or bend in two different directions, if you could choose between it, it will always bend in the direction that allows it to slow down. Energy is always trying to return to its lowest point. If you charge up a battery, the battery eventually, the charge eventually goes away, it depletes. If you heat something up, it eventually cools down. Well, if acoustic energy didn't gravitate toward the point of minimum velocity, if I said hello to you, it would continue all the way around the planet, eventually hit me in the back of the head. Sound has to die out. It has to be absorbed by the medium. So it's always turning in the direction that allows the sound to slow down. Well, the ocean, no surprise, is warmer at the top than it is at the bottom. Anybody who's ever been in a pool knows what it's like to feel warm on the upper 2 feet of your body and for your feet to be freezing because the upper layer of the swimming pool is much warmer. Well, sound travels faster in warm water than it does in cold water, which means that the sound tends to bend down away from the surface. Now, eventually the pressure will bend it back up, and there's all kinds of things going on. But basically, the majority of sound tends to go downward. If the submarine is low and we're high, our sound is going down. Some of his sound is reaching us, but not as much because his sound is trying to go down as well. So what ends up happening is the submarine tends to see the surface ship before the surface ship sees the submarine, which means that chances are he knows where you are before you know where he is. So there's that piece of it. The second piece of it is, and this is just, and before we get into the fire control problem and everything else, is that so far we've primarily been talking about active sonar. Active sonar is where you're transmitting into the water and getting something back. Most submarines have active sonar and they rarely use it. And the reason they rarely use it, and surface ships try not to use it as well, is because it's a great way to find out where something is, but it's also a great way to tell people where you are. And I gave you an imaginary scenario. If two people go down to, if you're a soldier and you're sent down into a basement to battle with a dark basement to battle with an enemy soldier, whichever one of you finds the other one first is probably going to win the fight, whichever one of you kind of figures out where the things are. Well, if you've got a flashlight, you can find the other guy in the dark pretty quickly. The problem is he can see your flashlight, right, the instant you turn it on. And it may take you a while to look everywhere, but now he knows exactly where you are. So you try to stay away from active sonar in most scenarios, because one of the things that it does is there's actually a ping, and I'm going to make there's a transmission pattern, and it's basically, the tone is like doo 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 do, do, do. And there's a standing joke in the surface community that stands for here I am. It's like announcing your presence. So if you're doing an active scenario, an active sonar scenario, you're trying to get this guy and shoot him as quickly as possible, and you're trying to get the information that you need to shoot him as quickly as possible, but he already knows where you are. He 100%. If you're transmitting a loud acoustic pulse into the sound column, into the water column, and it's refracting downward, because it will, because that's what sound does. It goes towards it tries to slow down. He can hear your ping better than you're going to be able to hear the return from the ping. So he's going to know where you are. To complicate the matters, because we don't want to be in that scenario where we're like, okay, we've got a flashlight, but now he can see us. He knows exactly where we are. We tend to shy away from active sonar in most scenarios, which means we use passive sonar. And passive sonar is listening for sounds that come to you. You're not transmitting anything into the water. You're receiving and processing acoustic information that reaches your sensors. And that's where you're trying to pick up things like vibration from the pumps that he's using to cool his reactor, or if he's running electric motors or blowers and all these different things. The sound that his hydraulics make as he's moving his dive planes or his stern planes, or he's turning his rudder. Anything that basically has movement in a medium creates sound. And submarines and surface combat ships alike are engineered to absorb and dissipate as much of that sound as possible, but nothing is completely silent. If he's out there in the water, he's making noise. And if we're out there in the water, we're making noise. But again, we're at the top of the water column and he's down into the water column. So the noise that we're making is going towards his sensors, and most of the noise that he's making is going away from our sensors. So as you said before, you never quite know where he is in the problem. So now we get back to the conversation that you were asking about, which is you've detected him. The thing is, we've now had this contact for 3 minutes. We don't know how long he's had us. We don't know how long he's known about us. We don't know how long this contact has been alerted. We may be 3 minutes into the fire control problem, figuring out when to shoot, when and where and how to shoot this guy. He may be 15 minutes into the fire control problem on his end, which means you may be still 10 minutes away from being ready to shoot, and he may be 30 seconds away from being ready to shoot. So, and as we discussed before, it's kind of like shooting out at the OK Corral. The weapons are good enough, the acoustic homing weapons and everything else are good enough where if he shoots you, there's a pretty good chance he's going to get you, and vice versa. So kind of whoever pulls the trigger first is probably going to come out on top of the scenario. So it's this constant, do we wait 3 more minutes and refine our solution and try to get a tighter shot, or are we so worried that he's ready to shoot us? It's this kind of, you were talking about the intense looks of people's faces. That intense look is because they're trying to winnow very specific sounds out of the environment. They're trying to figure out what those sounds mean. They're trying to make sure that they don't shoot anybody who doesn't deserve to be shot. And oh, by the way, they're trying to make sure that the enemy submarine that's out there at 12,000 yards is not 5 seconds away from blowing your doors off. So it's like we like to say that anti-submarine warfare is hours, days, and weeks of boredom followed by seconds of sheer panic or sheer terror. Because that's because in those few moments where you're doing that, you could be 30 seconds away from this guy blowing your doors off. So it's terrifying, but it's also fascinating.
It is like, I'm so fascinated and intrigued by it. I mean, to think about what it would be like, and everyone would have to be so cool and calm and steady and hyper focused.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's no room for a distraction in those moments. And then you have that adrenaline pumping,
Yeah.
so it's that fight or flight thing. And
Oh
do
yeah.
you actively just move forward and you guess, or do you wait, right? And yeah, I give you so much credit because, like I said, I don't think I have the composition to do it. That's a heck of an exercise there.
Well, the interesting thing is, and this is just in terms of human behavior, is that everyone else around you is setting the example for you. Nobody wants to be the guy who looks like they're as panicked as they actually are in a combat situation. So everybody is feigning calm so well that you actually maintain, even though there's this buzz of energy, you actually maintain. Maybe I shouldn't say that. It's entirely possible that everybody that I served with was actually calmer than I was. Maybe I'm doing them a disservice, but my sense is that everyone gets kind of as keyed up as I do in those circumstances. I'm assuming at least that that's a relatively normal human reaction, but everybody maintains this even strain. Everybody works so hard to be methodical and to be, okay, now we've done this, now we've done this, now let's do this, now let's look at a search arc over here, now let's do this, now let's prepare to launch the helo. Now, it's and you're just carrying out these methodical steps, and it's like the whole time you're feeling like you could be 30 seconds away from death, or 30 seconds away from killing somebody who doesn't deserve to be killed. So and you don't want any of that to happen. So but we're really, really good. You'd be surprised at how quiet it is in Combat Information Center. And I mean, people are talking and you could hear them, but you'd be surprised how quiet it is in Sonar Control and in Combat Information Center when an engagement is going on. It's like, it's very methodical. It's like, I don't know. It's just, it's an odd thing that we've managed to train entire generations of people who figure out how to operate in this panic zone.
Yeah, talk about like harnessing the power of the mind and the control over it, right? And the focus that goes
Yeah.
into that, because energy feeds off of one another. And I know, I mean, the situations I've been in that have been like a little dicey can't even compare to anything that you've encountered, right? But in those situations, it just takes just one person panicking. And all it does is, in that moment where you're trying to focus and think through the situation and the options available and which one is the best for that moment, that one person can throw everyone off their game. So
Yep.
that energy, feeding off of one another's energy, absolutely. So how do you stay focused? Like what, because I mean, just distractions and mind chatter, and then just, like, oh my gosh, is this it? Is this going to be our last breath? How do you like clear the space so you can just stay focused?
Well, here's another interesting thing. To speak to what you're asking about, so far we've been talking about anti-submarine warfare as though it occurs in a vacuum. So far we've been talking about it as though that's the only thing that you're doing. And sometimes it will be. Sometimes the chasing this submarine is the only thing that you're doing. That's your entire focus and everything else. But it's also entirely possible if somebody is trying to penetrate the battle group and get the carrier or something, the ship that you're on might actually be dealing with fighter jets and cruise missile, silkworm cruise missile batteries launching cruise missiles at you from the shore. And so there may be 75 other things going on. So you may be prosecuting an air scenario, an anti-surface scenario, and an anti-submarine scenario all at the same time. And it's not beyond the realm of possibility that one or more of those weapons is going to actually interact with your ship. You might actually, if somebody manages to get a leaker through and actually hit you with a missile or something, you're still trying to carry out an anti-submarine warfare scenario while literally on the other side of the bulkhead, people are running around putting out a fire, and damage control parties are screaming and de-smoking and everything else. So you're trying to stay in this kind of zen space where you're getting the job done while literally your ship could be on fire. When I first took intermediate gram analysis, which is basically learning to classify things by acoustic frequencies. That's it's by acoustic frequencies. It's entirely passive sonar. But when you take the intermediate gram analysis class, when you're classifying grams, there's like complete silence in the rooms, and you're looking at these printouts and you're comparing things and you're looking for frequency patterns and harmonics and you're measuring things and you're saying, okay, that looks like an engine signature. This is a blade signature. Let me compare these. Okay, the reduction ratio looks like this. This might be this kind of submarine. And you're doing it and it's all very clean and methodical and quiet. But the thing is, that doesn't represent what might be happening in the real world. You might actually have you're launching a helicopter and there are people flying and there's aircraft flying around and there are incoming missiles and there's somebody on the other side of the bulkhead that's putting out a fire. So it's like so you have to learn to go that extra step and to maintain that Zen thing in the face of chaos. So by the time you get to advanced programs, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but the instructors in those courses will actually try to annoy and distract the crap out of you while you're trying to do your job. I had one instructor who liked to play the song Funky Cole Medina at loud volumes, and you'd be doing a thing and he would come over and just push all your stuff off the table and then just move on to the next person. You'd have to pick all your stuff and pick up your 10 picks and your dividers and all of these tools that you're using and go right back in and get right back into that Zen space, because he's literally trying to go, and he's telling you, you're not always going to be in a perfect world. Your equipment may be failing. You may have you may have a cooling water leak over in the corner. There may be any number of other things that can be going on, but you have to kind of get back in the Zen space. And so it's like, it's that uber ultra quiet thing that you see in movies is real. People really do that, but you also have to try to keep your head in that space when things are not uber quiet around you. You have to try to stay there, and that's really challenging. So
I bet.
It's a weird thing to do for a living. What can I tell you?
Yeah, I mean, the discipline that it takes is incredible, and I think like retiring, you could probably go into any kind of meditation studio and teach them how to quiet the mind, for sure, absolutely, because you've done it in the most extreme situations and circumstances, you know.
I've never kind of thought of it as being meditational, but I guess it really kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, it's that amount of focus of just allowing things to go and focusing on the task at hand, right
Yeah.
ahead of you. I mean, that's incredible, this journey that you're telling us about.
And let me just say that what I'm talking about is kind of in a perfect world, because nobody has that kind of day every day. Nobody, nobody, you're some days you're not going to be able to keep your head in the game. Some days, 85 other things, and you just can't get there. And you're doing your job to the best of your ability. But it's like some days, it's as the old saying goes, some days you're the windshield and some days you're the bug. Um, uh, uh, it's that's what you're striving for. And the thing is, you're still going to maintain your calm and everything else. But sometimes you really are distracted by 85 other things. But you try not to be. You try not to be, because in a real world situation, it could be the difference between living and dying. So
Yeah, I mean, because you're a human being and life happens outside of that role. So, if you've had, an argument with somebody or you just received some bad news, and still having to maintain that space of focus is incredible. So, you had mentioned being able to detect what something is, and it's kind of like almost everything has its own fingerprint. Would that be accurate? So, the different submarines have kind of their own unique sound.
they absolutely do. And one of the exercises that I talked to you about on the phone is, if you can just do this as a kind of a mental exercise. Let's just say that you're standing in the parking lot of a Walgreens pharmacy or something, and you close your eyes and something drives behind you. You may not know exactly what that something is, but you can hear it. You can tell, is it a vehicle or a bicycle? You can cut it in half right now immediately and go, okay, that's definitely a vehicle. That's definitely an automobile of some kind. That's not a bicycle. I guess bicycles are vehicles as well, but that's an automobile type vehicle, not a bicycle. You can probably tell a big Dodge Ram with a diesel, with a Cummins diesel from I don't know, a Mazda sedan. And you could probably also tell, even though you can't necessarily recognize everything about it, you can probably tell a Volkswagen Beetle from just about anything else. Well, the Volkswagen Beetle has kind of an obvious acoustic signature. When you've heard that engine, you know what that engine sounds like. You don't even have to look around to know that's a bug. There's a Volkswagen Beetle over there. I can hear it. You don't even have to look around to see what that is. It might not be in fact, it might not technically be a Volkswagen Beetle. It could be a Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, but it's got the Beetle engine. If it's got the Beetle engine in it, you can hear that sound and recognize it. Well, there are some submarine classes that have such highly developed and I shouldn't say developed because it's not generally intentional, highly regular and predictable frequency patterns where they have what we call class identifiers, or where you can basically take one look at it and go, oh yeah, that's back in the day, a million years ago in a galaxy far, far away. That's a Soviet Alpha class. I know exactly I can spot that one thing right there and know exactly who this is. Sometimes you can get it down to uh, um, uh, this is a Russian-made diesel. Sometimes you can get it down to this is a Russian kilo class, and sometimes you can get it down to this is Russian kilo class hull number so and so, because we've figured out that the particular submarine in that class has a nick in one of the blades that makes a characteristic sound that nobody else is making. So sometimes you go from this is some type of submarine to this is a non-US submarine to this is a European submarine to this is a this looks very, very much like, and sometimes you get down to this is a German Type 209 submarine, and sometimes you get down to this is a German Type 209 submarine owned by the Argentinian Navy because we know about this particular thing that they have that nobody else has. So it can actually be as individualized as a fingerprint.
That's incredible. I mean, that is absolutely incredible, but it really speaks to the fact that sound talks to us and it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, a friend of mine,
absolutely.
he's a French-German composer, and his name's Alexander Lieberman. And we were connected because someone turned me on to his work. He takes nature sounds, animal sounds, and he trains his ear by listening to them and transcribing them into music. And then another friend of mine, Dan Dugan, he's in San Francisco. He goes out to the different national parks and he spends the night in them. And when, everyone else is gone, he records sound. And he does this every year so he can measure what sounds have changed in that environment
Hmm.
and what sounds have been added or what sounds are diminishing. And then it
Hmm.
says so much about the environment. So I mean, sound is really speaking to us all the time. And if we just take the time to listen, we can learn so much. I mean, you could detect what kind of submarine that is just by listening to it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's fascinating to me. Absolutely
Well,
fascinating.
if you think about this, I mean, the ultrasound, they put they can use an ultrasound. In fact, uh, um, I had an ultrasound used on me a couple of years ago to figure out whether or not something was a tumor. It wasn't, thank God, but it could have been. People. In fact, I used to work in a building where there was a commercial ultrasound company who specialized in giving parents the quality of baby videos of pre-birth baby videos that you don't get from generally the hospital's trying to go, okay, everything looks normal, birth looks fine, let's move on to the next thing, and they want you out the door in 5 minutes. But there are actually companies out there who turn this into an experience for the parents, and it's like they'll they have a comfortable suite where they do this and they play relaxing music, and they don't take 10 minutes to 5-10 minutes to do the ultrasound. They take an hour and a half and they get the best pictures that they can. And then it's like, oh my God, you can see his little fingers. And it's like, so sound has the ability, it is around us everywhere. And it has the ability to tell us things that we cannot possibly see with our eyes.
Yeah, I love the way you just described that. And I mean, for Alexander, he's listening to it to train his ear. For Dan, he's gauging the environment. For you, it's life or death. So there's different levels of it, but they're all really interesting in their own unique ways, right?
Yeah,
So
oh, absolutely. Here's an interesting thing. Now I've been trained. Sorry, my nose itches a little bit. I apologize. It's been a long time since I've been through the training and everything, but I spent a couple of decades being trained off and on the job training in paying attention to sound and what it means and what the consequences are and what this might be and what this is not and what it indicates and everything else. There are, even on a destroyer, several hundred people on board, even on a small ship, relatively small ship like a destroyer, there's several hundred people on board who have not had all that training. Nevertheless, they become conditioned to certain sounds in their environment. And it's amazing how many sailors who don't have any training in this at all will wake up at 3 in the morning because something changed. And because the ship, you've got the engines running, you've got the blowers running, the cooling plants going, you've got, water pumps running, you've got all these thousands of things that are going, and the hydraulic systems for the rudders and all of these thousands of systems operating at the same time. And there's this general kind of hum going on of the ship is kind of just alive with technology, even at 3 in the morning, and you're totally used to it. And you'll wake up suddenly in the middle of the night and you'll go, something changed. And it'll be they shut a pump off because they're doing maintenance on the pump at 4 in the morning or something. They shut off a fuel oil pump or something somewhere. And it's like people who don't even have any training in this get so kind of tuned in to what the ship is supposed to sound like that they'll go, something changed. And even if they don't know what it is. So it's interesting. So again, even without the training, if you spend enough time around sound, you can, different types of sound, it can start to affect kind of your perception of your environment.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and it's amazing because it's almost like it becomes part of a rhythm that
Absolutely. No, very much.
yeah, and when that rhythm's broken, it's like all of a sudden we fall out of sync, and it's like, okay, what just changed in my environment, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. So let me ask you, with sonar, I mean, we're using it to detect objects, but
Yes.
could there be any, can it cause harm in any way since it is
Well,
a wave?
well, now passive sonar, the answer to that would be the passive sonar. My inclination would be to say no. I'm not going to pretend to be a physicist or a specialist in this. I can't think of any manner in which passive sonar, in which just listening to the environment, could cause harm. Active sonar can definitely cause harm. First of all, uh, sound is vibration of a medium. You can't have sound in outer space because there's no medium. If you're in a perfect vacuum, there's no sound. You need a source, a medium, and a detector to have sound, which kind of answers that question. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a noise? The answer is no. It's not a noise until something detects that sound and actually interprets it. If a bird hears it, it made a sound. But if nothing heard it at all, it's just a vibration. But all vibration is mechanical energy. Mechanical energy is force. It's moving things. If you've ever seen in old Western movies where, say, a Native American scout would put his ear to a railroad track and hear the train coming 10 miles, 10 miles away, that actually works because the acoustic energy transmits through the medium and what have you. But if you think about it, that's a train vibrating a train track, X number of miles away. That's incredible, but it's actually true. That's mechanical force, and it's a non-trivial amount. If you get too close to a ship that's transmitting active sonar, it will hurt you and it may kill you. There are definite combinations of frequencies that are dangerous and frequencies and transmission strengths that are dangerous. That's 100% true. I mean, if you think about it, I believe there's an increasing amount of evidence that some type of sonic weapon was used on the U.S. Embassy in Cuba. People reported nausea, and I believe that there have actually been some degrees of organic brain damage. There's evidence that, or I shouldn't say evidence. I don't know that may be too strong a word. I believe there are indications that sonic weapons have been used on U.S. Embassy personnel in Cuba. And I think there might have been something recently in the OEOB in Washington, D.C., but I could be wrong about that. But the bottom line is there are cases of people being attacked by sound they can't even hear. So to answer the short answer to your question is sound is mechanical energy, and mechanical energy has, like any other kind of energy, can be dangerous. So there are certain frequencies that we try to stay away from, and certain things that we try to do. We don't transmit when humans are in the water within X distance of the ship. In fact, there's when you're on a ship, you have this thing called the 1MC. It's the general announcing circuit. It's basically like a PA, a public address system. And the 1MC is used to make announcements to the crew. And you can do topside, which is above decks where everybody can hear you, that's out on the outside portions of the ship. You can do below decks where people can hear you, only inside the skin of the ship, inside the hull and inside the superstructure. Or you can do both. And depending on the nature of the announcement, sometimes some things you announce only internally, some things you announce topside, sometimes you do both. One of the things that you do in both places is an announcement if you have divers over the side, because ships get, their hulls can be damaged. They can pick up barnacles and various types of sea life that slow the ship down, that interfere with some of the underwater systems and sensors that we have. So we periodically have hull inspections, and we have divers down under the ships to clean the hulls and things of that nature. Well, if you've got divers in the water and Seaman Schmuckatelli has tried to do maintenance on the sonar, if he starts transmitting, if he starts trying to do quarterly check Q1, which involves transmitting the sonar, which there's actually restrictions on when you could do that. But just for instance, if he did, or she, whoever it is, happen to actually light off the sonar and transmit actively into the water, it could deafen the divers, it could injure the divers, it could potentially, depending on where they are and your signal strength and everything else, potentially kill the divers. So back to the 1MC, there's a word that you pass, I think it's every 15 minutes, that there's a word that you pass, an announcement you make over the 1MC, which is like an announcement over the public address system, about every 15 minutes, I think. Maybe it's every half hour, I don't remember. It's been too long, but it's there are divers working over the side, and there's a whole list of things you don't do that are all included in this. And I'm not going to remember it perfectly, but it's going to be something like do not jack screws, cycle rudders, or do not operate sonar, jack screws, cycle rudders, or take suction from or discharge to the sea. There's a whole list of things while divers are working over the side. But one of the things on that list is don't put any acoustic energy into the water because you can hurt these people. We're trying to pick up a submarine 20,000 yards away. We have to put a lot of energy into the water to do that. Somebody 15 yards away from the transducer, it's probably going to kill them. So, and to move it away from a less kind of species-centric kind of things, certain active sonar transmissions are also harmful to certain types of marine life. So the Navy is becoming increasingly aware of what those things are, and they're increasingly designing systems to stay away from things that we think are harmful in marine life.
Well, that's really good to hear for sure. So, I mean, the power of sound or those vibrations, the waves, right?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It can be used to help. It can also be used to hurt. So,
Yes.
yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
I think it was William Gibson, the author William Gibson, who said that every tool has two purposes. He said that the first time someone invented a hammer, someone said, I could build a bridge, I could build a house, I could build a hospital, I could build a cathedral, and the guy next to him said, I could knock my kids in the head with that. So I think it almost doesn't matter. If we create a tool, there will be ways that tool can be dangerous. So, and we just have to be cautious about that. We have to be aware and try to take that into account and act responsibly. I mean, a car is, a ton and a half, 2 tons of lethal metal, that hurtling down the road at speeds that sometimes exceed our reaction times. So, we have to be careful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So one of the things we had talked about earlier were the attention to detail and how details matter. And I just had a conversation with somebody about the power of words and language, right? And one of the things we had talked about is I remember when these first hit the stores, those electronic pads where you sign your name. It drives me bonkers for some reason because I feel like it's taking away from the actual thought and the intent of this is my name and there's value to this, right? Even though it's like a purchase at Target or whatever it is, right? But it's like just a line now, and people are so careless, I think, with the way they're scripting things. But I think the details matter, and there's something that goes into that, whether it's a signature, whether it's the way, you organize something, but those details matter. And I think I shared the story with you on the phone of I had an intern for an event that I was working, and we were handing out, these these packets of information, and I asked her to staple them a certain way, and I showed her exactly how to staple them, and she brought them back, this giant stack, and they were stapled like kind of crooked on the side, and I'm like, no, you need to do these all over. I am sorry, but this is not acceptable. But there's so much that can be found in the details. So can you talk about the details? Because the details for you and for your role and your job and what you're doing, those details really matter. So how you go about your everyday life, no matter what you're doing, right? The details matter. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I brought up during our phone call, and I think it might be fun to talk about it here a little bit, is when you go through boot camp, basic training in the Navy. I don't know if they're still doing this. I imagine they are. If they're not doing it, they should be. They're fanatical about how you fold your uniforms. I mean, this has to be 45 degrees. That crease has to be here. This has to be 3 inches. How you roll your socks, it matters. How you fold your t-shirts, it matters. How you line them up, it matters. How tall the stack is, it matters. They're literally, you start out, at least you used to, but they give you a notebook and you copy the clothes folding notes for how to do this. And you learn how, this is how your socks go. This is how your underwear goes. This is how your shirt, this is how your shirt goes. This is how your pants go. This is where your shoes go, your boondockers go. And this is how they're lined up. And someone will come by and inspect those things. And they'll come by and they'll take a Blue Jackets manual, which is this book right here. It's kind of the Navy's book on this is how we do business, except they'll give you a paperback edition in boot camp. But it's like the height of a paperback of one is like a foot, and it's like 6 inches across that way and 3 inches this way or something. Whatever the dimensions are, they're known. And if your stack is supposed to be, 12 inches tall, they'll come in with a Blue Jackets manual and measure it, and they'll go, okay, your clothes are not lined up properly, and you will get punished or rewarded based on how well you're doing that. And everyone going through boot camp kind of has the same reaction, which is, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I joined the military to do big important things, and we're obsessing over how my socks are folded. It's like, how could this possibly have any significance at all in the world? This is and you start thinking, and you start joking about it when you're in boot camp. You start joking about, we've joined an organization that's insane. This makes no sense. Well, if you think about it, some of the people are going to leave that boot camp company where they've just learned to pay this obsessive attention to detail. They're going to go work on actual freaking nuclear reactors. And some of them are going to handle bombs. And some of them are going to mount missiles to planes. And some of them are going to do repairs on jet engines for aircraft that are going to fly at supersonic speeds. And some of them are going to be launching torpedoes and ASROCs, anti-submarine rockets, at things in the water, and trying really, really, really hard not to kill innocent people. So it's like the Navy is teaching you that attention to detail is vital from the beginning. And nobody tells you, here's why we're teaching you this. But you come away with the understanding that if the Navy wants this thing torqued to 15 foot-pounds plus or minus 1, it really needs to be 15 foot-pounds plus or minus 1. If the Navy wants the measurement for this particular voltage to be in this range, it really needs to be in that range, because this affects that thing, which affects that thing, which affects that thing over there. And it's like, so you're living in a world where attention to detail is everything. Yeah. And there are times where you can get sloppy about things. And there are times where, there are times, I shouldn't say where you can get sloppy about. There are times where you think you can get sloppy about things. There are times where you're like, oh, that deck drain is down in a fan room it's in a fan room that nobody ever sees. And, and if I just do a quick so-and-so and I don't actually, until the moment where it bites you, until the moment where that thing actually begins to matter, until the one circumstance somewhere along the line where that becomes the weak point in your armor, where that becomes the device or the article that fails because you didn't pay the attention to detail that it demands. And it's one of those things where, you think one of the things that can get you in trouble in the military and the Navy is if you start to think that what you're doing exists in a vacuum. You can get so focused on what you're doing that, why does this piece matter? I'm the only one who cares about this. Well, what you don't realize is that thing that you're doing affects this device way over there. It affects somebody else. I remember a particular circumstance in which, shortly after I made Sonar supervisor for the first time, we were going through an exercise, an anti-submarine warfare exercise, and we actually had the entire anti-submarine warfare team manned up, and we were all staffed up, and we were all on headphones, on sound-powered phones, and we're doing all of our stuff. And I'm like, okay, if I turn this way, I can bring the contact around to the port side of my array. I can do this. I can get a cross fix over here. Anyway, so I asked the ASWE, the anti-submarine warfare evaluator, I recommend to turn to starboard X number of degrees. Well, I never get my turn to starboard. I recommend it like 3 times. I never get my turn to starboard. I was frustrated. I'm like, this anti-submarine warfare evaluator doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, I need to put this guy on the port side of my array. Well, he could have communicated a little better than he did, but what he realized that I didn't realize were 2 things. There was shallow water over in the direction I wanted to turn, and there was something going on the surface that I was completely not paying attention to. There was information that I didn't have, but I was operating like I was in a vacuum, and so I was making recommendations that were not overall good for the ship. Now, if he had done what he should have done, he would have said something along the negative, can't turn to starboard because of X, Y, and Z. Give me your alternate plan. We could have moved on, and that would have been better. But nevertheless, attention to detail matters even on things where it doesn't seem to matter, because you never know where that becomes the thing that becomes important.
I love like the wheels are just turning. I love how you just described that whole thing because I mean, really, everything is connected, and what one part does, it affects all the parts, and what one
Absolutely.
person does, it affects someone else, right?
Yeah,
Just when you think like, well, what I'm doing doesn't really matter, it's so maybe you consider it to be small in the grand scheme of things, but nothing is because it all counts, it all matters. And being prepared, having that intact, and how you handle those small things in life is how you're going to handle the larger ones too. And those small ones, they all build on one another. So everything's
absolutely.
connected, and yeah, it's just I love the way you just
Yep.
described that.
Do you want to hear a crazy true story?
Yes, please.
I was serving on a U.S. Navy ship, and the class of ship that I was on was pretty quiet. They have gas turbine engines, but they're isolated in acoustic modules. They have a system called Prairie Masker, or well, it's really two systems, Prairie Air and Masker, that inject air bubbles into the water to decouple the ship's acoustic signature from the water column. It's like there are all kinds of things going on. Ships are overall, compared to previous generations, they're not as quiet as submarines by any means, but compared to previous generations of U.S. Navy warships, they're pretty damn quiet. They're pretty quiet. Well, I served on a particular ship, uh, um, and we had something called a foghorn. And when I say foghorn, I'm not talking about an actual foghorn that transmits. We had an acoustic signal called a foghorn, that's generally when you make a turn or something, it's a hydraulic resonance that makes a sound that sounds a bit like a foghorn acoustically. So that's the nickname for it, is a foghorn. We had a foghorn that we weren't supposed to have. We were creating an acoustic sound during, I think it was a port side turn. During port side turns, we were creating an acoustic sound, a line of frequency that shouldn't be there. Our class of ships was not supposed to create this. And it got investigated. We went onto this acoustic range and we would turn the ship in various directions. They were measuring our frequencies from various directions. You'll never guess what it turned out to be. I'm not kidding you. It turned out to be a mop bucket, what we call a Cadillac. It's a galvanized bucket on wheels. You've seen them like the janitor has one or the custodian has one, and they put the mop in there and it has the ringer on it, and well, everything at sea has to be stowed. You can't just let it lie around because the ship's got to go rocking and rolling, making sudden turns. So you have to stow for sea. So everything has to be locked in a cabinet, put into a rack, strapped down, tied down. You're constantly looking for ways to stow things, to keep them. You just can't have articles lying around. You can import to some degree, but one of the things that you do when you're getting ready to go to sea is you stow for sea. And that's where everything goes in drawers, everything gets locked up, everything gets put away. Well, this kid who was in charge of this mop bucket, this is one of the things that's his job, right? He's got to find a place to stow the mop bucket. He found this nice little pocket in the corner of a bulkhead, nice little place where two bulkheads came together, and these pipes made a curve like this, and it made this nice little kind of three-sided well for him to drop this thing into. So he did. He dropped this thing in there, and he's like, wow, it kind of wedges in there. It's not going to move at all. Well, what happened were those pipes were hydraulic pipes, and they were acoustically isolated from the hull. They had shock mounts in the whole 9 yards. He created, with this metal bucket, a sound short from these pipes to the hull. So now this hydraulic vibration that's going through these pipes, that's being isolated by these shock mounts, is now going straight out through the hull. So we're going through, I don't know how much that day spent on the range cost, but it couldn't have been cheap. But we're going through this entire investigation because that's a nickname in the Navy. We used to have Seaman Schmuckatelli, which means just some kid who wears a uniform. But because Seaman Schmuckatelli stuck a mop bucket into a place that he thought was a good place for a mop bucket. And so it's like, no, it was he literally changed the acoustic signature of the ship and made us more detectable to enemy submarines and forced us to deviate from our plans to figure out what was going on, to have an investigation, because he did something that seemed like the simplest thing in the world. So yeah, the little things all connect to the big things.
That's unbelievable. I mean, that is unbelievable. And the amount of time and money, and like you said, maybe putting
Yeah,
a jeopardy over it. That's, yeah, just
because
bucket in the
yeah,
place.
Well, it could have been something else. It could have been a pump failing. It could have been, we had a weld broken somewhere in the hull that was creating this vibration. There are 1,000 things that it could have been that were all serious. And it's one of those things where you can't just walk in and go, Doc, I got this serious chest pain. It's probably heartburn. You're fine. It's like you have to investigate and make sure that it's not something serious. You have to get down to the point where you're like, okay, yeah, you shouldn't eat the garlic bread. You're going to be fine. But you have to eliminate the things that are. So it's like this kid who had no intention of doing it took command of the schedule of a U.S. Navy warship and the range, and and our captain, our executive officer, the entire crew, hundreds of people were at this kid's beck and call, and he didn't know it, trying to basically figure out what he had done. So yeah, the little things matter. The details are vital.
Yeah, hopefully he learned the lesson that day for sure. And I think
One
this
would
is
hope.
a lesson for everyone that
One
it
would
doesn't
hope.
matter how big or small the task is, it matters. Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the things that we did was to make sure that never happened again is our executive officer had I don't remember what it was. I want to feel like it was a big coil of like foam had that stuck in there and like put down in there so you couldn't put anything in there. And he sent a message out to other ships of our class saying, oh, by the way, you're going to want to put something in there to keep this from happening again. So you don't want to just learn that lesson for yourself. You want to share it as a lesson learned for other ships of your class.
Yeah.
But that was, who in the world would have thought it was a mop bucket?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I know even on projects I've been on when, you go through the training and, I'm reading certain things off the list and as I'm saying them, like, how is this in this list? Like, but someone did it at some point. That's why it made the list. It's like, oh my gosh, unbelievable, but it's there, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
sure. So let me ask you, what are some of your personal favorite sounds? It could be anything from like music to nature sounds or whatever that is for you. Especially, I think you're so sensitive to sound. I mean, sound has been a lot of how you've spent your time. So what are some of your favorite sounds?
I like rain on a tin roof. I like a lot of white noise. I like the sound of surf, the waves crashing. I like any sounds that remind me of water. Um, I like cellos. I love the sound of a cello. I'm definitely much more into strings than I am other types of instruments. Um, what else do I like? I love I love the sound of dolphins. I think I think there's something magical about dolphins. Dolphins are and I don't know who it was that said this. It might have been the science fiction writer humorist Douglas Adams, but I don't remember who said it. But uh, dolphins could theoretically be the most intelligent species on the planet. It's We have technology to clothe ourselves and to give us communications and to give us rapid transportation and to feed ourselves and to house and protect ourselves from the environment. Well, dolphins are at home in their environment and they can swim faster than the majority of boats and ships that we build, and they can communicate over far distances without any technology, and they're more hyper aware of their environment than most other things are. It's like 99% of, well, I won't say 99%, many, the vast majority of the things that we create technology to do for us, dolphins do automatically. They do it organically. They could be an entire species of poets, mathematicians, and philosophers, and we'd never know it.
Yeah, I love that, and I am fascinated by them. I'm fascinated by animal life, and I think just nature in general. And it's funny because someone will say, "Well, they don't know," and it's like, "Well, how do you know they don't know?" So
Yeah.
just because we don't understand it in the same way that it's like, okay, well, maybe why are they acting? I don't know. How would I know? I'm not a dolphin or another animal or plant or just because we don't understand it and it's not something in our head that we can process doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Kind of
Yeah.
like it sounds. Just because we can't maybe sometimes hear the vibration, it doesn't mean it's not around us, right?
Yeah.
We're not privy to it. So I would love to see someone do a book, and this might already be out there because I understand with dolphins that there are so many stories of them coming to the rescue of somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to see someone gather all those stories and just talk about the magic that is the dolphin. Yeah.
Well, sometimes when you're transmitting active, so would I, by the way. I would love to read that book or see that documentary or whatever it happens to be. But that would be fantastic. But you just made me think about the fact that sometimes when you're cruising through the water and you're operating active sonar, a pod of dolphins will come up and swim across your bow, and they're back and forth, and they'll be doing crisscrossing in in your back and forth across your bow and everything. And it's like they can hear the sonar and everything else. And I always think they might think we're the really big dumb kid. We only say the same, we keep repeating ourselves over and over and over again because we're putting, because they communicate with sound and we're communicating with sound. But we're basically saying the same thing over and over and over again, really loud. I think they think we're the big dumb kid. And sometimes they're going, come on, come play with us. And they're like, well, you're just not catching on, are you? So I think I sometimes they think we're the big dumb kid in the water.
Yeah, I could see that. I think there's a lot to learn from them for sure. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So how do you think sound will be used in the future?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I feel like every time we kind of think we've exhausted what it's for, we open another door and figure out that there's an entirely different kind of well, actually, I just found out the other day that there's an entire class of computer hacking that involves not breaking into your computer at all, but putting an acoustic sensor in the vicinity of your computer, because it turns out that everywhere you touch a key on your keyboard makes a slightly different sound against the back panel. And there are people who can actually take that in software and figure out what your passwords are and what you were typing. They can actually reconstruct what's going into your keyboard. There's now an entire branch of hacking that's just, and I say just, I don't know how long it's been going on. I became aware of it a few days ago. It might have been going on for years, but there's an entire branch of computer hacking that's built around listening to the acoustic sounds that come out of your keyboard when you're typing. I would have never expected that. I would have never expected us to use ultrasound to see what a fetus looks like in the womb. I would have never expected us to use ultrasound to find tumors inside our bodies, but we do it. It's like I can't imagine what the next applications are going to be, but I think they're going to be unexpected.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting journey we're on. I'm excited to see where it takes us for sure.
It
So
is.
I think the possibilities are endless, and someone will say like, "Oh, well, what do you know about that?" At the end of the day, I'm not sure what I know.
Yeah.
You so that's how I feel. I'm not real sure. We'll see.
What's the famous saying? I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
I would just like to add this, and this actually kind of comes out in one of in the very first military novel that I ever wrote. Um, if there's ever a character, I don't write myself into my books. Although I will say this, if my characters have a particular strength or a talent, it probably belongs to somebody else. If my characters have a weakness or an annoying habit, it's probably mine. I think that's where I tend to manifest in my novels through the weaknesses and foibles of my characters. But there's a chief sonar technician named Teresa Mcpherson, and she's having a bit of an existential crisis before she realizes they're actually going into battle with submarines for the first time in her career. And the commanding officer of the ship is touring the ship the night before they think there's going to be a battle, which is, by the way, an old tradition for commanding officers to tour their ship before a battle. And the commanding officer comes across Chief McPherson down in the torpedo magazine. And she's standing there with her hand on this Mark 46 torpedo. And he asks her what she's doing. And she has this little kind of soliloquy or whatever, where she talks about she's been training her entire life to find submarines and to track submarines and to kill submarines. And that now that she's finally getting ready to do it, she can't see the submarines anymore. She can only see the faces of the people on the submarine. And she suddenly realizes it's not this dark metallic shark in the water. It's a vehicle that is staffed and run and managed and organized and inhabited by human beings. And that now she's prepared to do her job, but now she realizes that she really is going through she had secretly hoped to get through her entire career and never actually have to do the thing that she practices for. And that's very much how I felt about it and how I feel about it. I would have been perfectly happy to get through. I actually did get through my entire career without actually having to have an anti-submarine warfare engagement. We never actually had to shoot a submarine while I was in the Navy. And I'm happy about that. I was trained for it. I was ready for it. I like to think it's like firefighters. Firefighters are constantly training to put out fires. They're looking for ways to break through the window of your house and come in and tear out the ceiling and get into the attic and stop the fire before it burns your house down. They're constantly training to fight fires, but they're never looking forward to it. And so one of the things to remember is that most of the people who are out there doing this job, they're not in it because they're trigger happy. They're in it because somebody has to do it, and because they're hoping that if they do their job really well, maybe nobody has to get hurt.
Right. Yeah, very powerful. That's very powerful, for sure. Well, thank
So
you for sharing that.
that's all I know. My brain is empty now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what else you could say beyond that. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out today, and thank you for sharing everything that you did. And thank you to Paco for connecting us. And Jeff, if people want to learn more about your novels or your work, how would they be able to do so?
You can find my novels on Amazon. You can just Google Jeff Edwards. I'm usually the first thing that pops up. Or you can go to my website, which is jeffedwardswrites.com. And that's in it. There's a tiny little interesting story behind that. By the time I realized that my name had become a common Google search term and that I probably needed to buy jeffedwards.com, the bots had hijacked it and the cost was up to about $30,000. So I'm jeffedwardswrites.com because I'm a popular Google search term, or at least popular enough to ping the bots, popular enough to get the bots excited. So they're constantly trying to, these cyber squatting bots are constantly trying to sell me my own name as a domain name for $30,000. And I'm like, I'll stick with Jeff Edwards Writes. I actually, by the way, and I said this to you before, I don't actually recommend reading my books. The author is an idiot, so I think you'd probably be better off. I think you should buy them. You should totally buy my books. You should have 3 or 4 copies, but use them to kill flies or level tables or, pretty up your bookshelf. Don't actually read them. The author's an idiot.
I don't believe that for a second. I haven't had a chance to read them yet, but I will say that just this journey that you took us on today, I'm not buying that for a second. I bet they're fascinating reads for sure. So, yeah, well, thank you for everything. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for your service as
Thank you.
well. Very appreciated. And yeah, we'll look forward to keeping in touch and learning more as we navigate through this world of ours and seeing where it's.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.